Have you ever experienced something completely unexplainable that made you question reality? Share your story. The late afternoon sun hung low, pale and weak through the tall library windows, casting long, trembling shadows over the rows of books. Outside, the wind tugged at skeletal branches, whispering secrets no one dared to hear. Inside the quiet sanctuary, the flickering fluorescent lights hummed unevenly, struggling against the encroaching gloom. Emily Carter stood behind the Len desk, the soft thud of books being scanned punctuating the heavy silence. Her glasses caught a hint of the dusky light, balancing tenuously on the bridge of her nose. She adjusted them unconsciously, fingers trembling slightly beneath the cozy sleeves of her oversized sweater. A chill crept up her spine, though the air was still. Her chest tightened. She reached for the next volume, the pages brittle, the cover dust-flecked, when the brusque voice shattered the quiet. "Emily! We need to talk," the library director snapped, emerging from the shadows between shelves. His tone bore the weight of accusation, cold and sharp. His footsteps echoed ominously on the wooden floor as he approached, eyes hard and unyielding. She swallowed, her heart hammering. "Yes, Mr. Hargrove? There was a mix-up in the cataloging. A rare book was misplaced last week. It's gone missing from the archive. You were the last to handle it. Care to explain?" The room seemed to constrict. The air thickened as if trying to smother her. Emily's mind clawed for an explanation, a defense, but the words dissolved before they could form. "I don't." Didn't. Her voice was barely a whisper, trembling fragilely between doubt and disbelief. "Enough." His gaze bored into her, heavy with disappointment. "Lost items of this nature are serious. You should know better." His words landed like harsh, unforgiving stones. The staff nearby diverted their eyes, their silence a stark accusation. The once familiar walls felt hostile, the shadows twisting into elongated fingers that clawed at her resolve. Emily's breath hitched, a shallow rhythm of panic and shame. Her cheeks flamed, heat rising, burning fiercely as if her guilt was etched in fire. But she knew the truth, a truth unspoken. She had not misplaced the book. She had returned it exactly as it was found, nestled carefully in its shelf, untouched and unblemished. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hargrove," she said quietly, voice brittle yet sincere. "I double-checked everything." She hoped her words might bridge the growing gulf of doubt. He shook his head, voice icy. "That won't do. You need to be more careful. We can't afford mistakes like this, Emily. Not in this place." She nodded, the sting of humiliation pressing her spine into a frozen posture. The weight of rejection, subtle yet profound, pinned her beneath the gaze of cold accusation. Her hands twitched, fingers curling into fists on the wooden ledge. As Mr. Hargrove turned away, Emily's eyes flickered to the rare book section, silent sentinels of forgotten worlds now seemingly barred to her care. The empty library felt suddenly immense, cold like a cavern that swallowed dreams whole. The fading light fractured against the windows, streaks of amber and gray bleeding into the dim. The overhead lights flickered once-twice, casting eerie shadows that danced mockingly at the edge of vision. Her chest tightened further as the silence swallowed her. She forced herself to take another breath, shallower this time. Her limbs felt weighted, the room spinning slowly with a poisonous haze of doubt that blurred the once sharp lines of the shelves. She lowered her gaze, catching the frayed hem of her sweater, every thread a reminder of the comfort she sought but could not find. The quiet swarm of whispered conversations behind the stacks, gossipy murmurs weighing heavy in the silence, felt as though they belonged to another world, an unreachable place where she once believed she could belong. Emily's eyes stung, a hot sheen of unshed tears pooling behind her lids. But she blinked them back fiercely, unwilling to let the cracks show in her carefully guarded facade. Slowly, painfully, she retreated from the front desk, her footsteps soft but hesitant. The muffled hoot of an owl outside echoed through the foggy dusk, a lonely call in the growing darkness. She slipped between aisles swollen with dust motes suspended in the fading light, each breath a reminder of the thin line between order and chaos. The library, a place of refuge, now felt like a maze, a trap enclosing her in shadows of doubt and shame. Emily's hands hovered over the spines of books, each one an ancient promise of stories and escape, yet none offering solace. Her fingers trembled, brushing against textures rough and familiar. The lights flickered again, casting brief, oppressive darkness. In that moment, the silence was pierced by a faint, almost imperceptible whisper, a murmur so soft she thought she imagined it. She paused, breath caught halfway, but the moment passed. Only the creak of floorboards reminded her she was utterly alone. Her shoulders slumped as she sank onto the worn leather chair near the window, the fog muffling the world beyond. Her reflection stared back, pale and uncertain, the auburn strands of hair tangled like forgotten dreams. A tremor of anger rose inside her, fierce but silent. Not at Mr. Hargrove. Not even at the lost book. At herself for the gnawing seed of doubt taking root where confidence once lived. The room grew darker as long shadows crept closer, swallowing the edges of her world. The steady flicker of the overhead lights became a stuttered rhythm, a heartbeat unnatural and threatening. Time stretched and thickened. Her breathing was a ghostly rhythm that filled the hollow spaces. Her eyes fluttered closed, seeking refuge from the crushing weight, but the silence around her grew tangible, soft, suffocating like a breathless secret waiting to unfold. And in that spectral stillness, the thin veil between certainty and fear began to unravel, quietly, relentlessly. The library's skeletal quiet stretched uncomfortably between breaths, thickening the air like damp fog clinging to skin. Emily sat frozen in the worn leather chair by the window, the chill from the creeping dusk curling into her bones. The weak street lamps outside threw long, wavering shadows over the fog, ghostly fingers scraping at the glass as if desperate to reach her. Her hands, clammy and unsteady, trembled slightly in her lap, fingers interlacing with an instinctive longing for control she couldn't grasp. Each blink seemed to stretch too long, the darkness pressing closer as her mind churned in spirals of doubt and shame. The weight of Mr. Hargrove's words clawed at her insides, raw and relentless, each syllable another nail tightening the coffin of her confidence. She hadn't misplaced the book. She knew it, felt it as surely as the blood pulsing through her veins, but the accusation lingered like a stain she couldn't scrub away. Her throat tightened, a silent scream caught beneath the walls of her ribcage. Maybe the mistake had been subtle, an overlooked detail, a moment of faltering concentration. But in this small, cloistered town library, mistakes were costly. They were fractures in the fragile order she struggled to maintain. The overhead lights flickered, throwing the aisle into partial darkness once more. Shadows danced long, creeping, almost sentient, dragging their cold fingers across the rows of books. Emily's breath caught, her pulse quickening as an unsettling chill snaked its way up her spine. She forced herself to steady her breathing, the shallow inhales rhythmically punctuated by the faint creaks of the old building settling. It was as if the library itself was closing in, tightening its grip, whispering silent accusations. She heard the distant shuffle of footsteps, soft, deliberate echoing between the stacks. But when she glanced up, no one was there. The space felt oppressive, the silence thick with unspoken words and unseen eyes. Her reflection in the dark window blurred and shifted, a ghostly double that seemed darker and more hollow than her. Her fingers flexed against the fabric of her sweater, the worn threads a fragile tether to reality. The anger she dared not voice simmered beneath the surface, a slow, burning ember. Not anger at the lost book, nor at the director's harshness, but at the injustice of being stripped bare, doubted, dismissed. She remembered the hours her fingers traced the spines, the quiet nights cataloging and preserving forgotten histories. Moments when the library had felt like a sanctuary, a world separate from the creeping loneliness clawing at her throat. Now those walls felt like a cage, each book a silent witness to her unraveling. A whisper of sound tugged at the edges of her awareness, barely audible, almost imaginate a breathy susurrus unlike the creaks and groans of the building. She blinked hard, scanning the shelves. An ancient tome, half buried beneath dust and time, caught the slanting light with a dull, almost imperceptible shimmer. Her gaze locked onto it, a distant flicker of curiosity piercing the haze of shame. The book was thick, leather-bound, its cover weathered and cracked, worn by years of silence. Emily's hand reached out hesitantly, each movement deliberate, as if the touch might ignite something fragile and volatile. The moment her fingers brushed the spine, a faint voice rippled through the air, soft, intimate, unmistakably hers. The words were fragmented, a whisper of a memory she didn't recognize, a story she felt but couldn't fully grasp. The voice echoed in the empty space, a ghostly ripple against the walls, intimate and unsettling. Emily recoiled slightly, heart pounding in a chaotic rhythm. She clutched the book closer, the whispered words threading through her like an eerie lullaby. It was as if some part of her unseen, buried deep, was trying to reach out, to reveal something lost beneath the layers of doubt and fear. Her breath caught again, mingling with the faint scent of old paper and binding glue, the tangible weight of history pressing into her palms. The room's shadows seemed to lean in, the library holding its breath as if waiting for her to unravel the mystery held within those fragile pages. A distant thunder rolled softly, the first murmurs of an approaching storm, muted but ominous. Outside, the fog thickened, swallowing the world in quiet white. Inside, the flickering light steadied and then dimmed, leaving her suspended in a pocket of shadows. Emily's eyes flickered with an unspoken resolve, a subtle shift amidst the despair. The shame and anger had not vanished, they simmered just beneath the surface, but beneath them, something awakening. A fragile seed of purpose, a whispered promise buried within the ancient words calling to her. Clutching the mysterious tome, she rose slowly from the chair, the weight of the moment pressing heavily on her shoulders but tempered by a faint glimmer of courage. The long night stretched ahead, cloaked in uncertainty, but also whispered of revelations waiting just beyond the edge of fear. With one last glance to the darkening window, where the world blurred into fog and shadow, Emily stepped deeper into the maze of shelves, guided by the flickering light and the echo of a voice that was hers but not entirely her own. The ancient book in Emily's hands felt impossibly heavy, as if the weight of unspoken centuries pressed down through the cracked leather cover and seeped into her flesh. The dim light of the library flickered, wavering uncertainly between order and chaos, casting deep shadows that swallowed the edges of the room. Dust motes drifted in slow spirals, suspended like echoes of forgotten stories. Her breath fogged softly against the chill that hummed low beneath the silence. Drawing the tome closer, her fingers traced the intricate embossing across the cracked spine, faint patterns like twisting vines and obscure symbols lost to memory. A restless current seemed to pulse through the book, vibrating faintly under her touch, as if it were alive and breathing in the stale air. She lowered herself to the floor amid the neglected shelves, surrounded by a fortress of forgotten knowledge, and carefully opened it. The pages were brittle, yellowed by time, their edges ragged and uneven. As she flipped through, the library's ambient hummed, distant drip of a leaky pipe, the restless sighs of the old building morphed into a deeper, stranger murmur. Then she heard it, clearer than before. Her own voice, soft and intimate, spilling from the margins of the text. It narrated a memory she didn't recognize, words filtered through the fog of her mind like half-remembered dreams. I was there, beneath the willow tree, the air heavy with whispered promises. The fear was a shadow, always behind me, but I pretended not to see it. Her pulse quickened. The voice was hers, but the story was alien, a shard of herself she had never willingly revealed. Goosebumps prickled along her arms, and the library's walls seemed to lean closer, eager listeners. She shivered in the too cool air, a magnetic blend of dread and curiosity pulling her deeper into the whispered confession. The flickering light surged, casting swirling patterns on the walls that resembled grasping hands. The quiet transformed into a slow, tidal pulse resonating from the book itself, a rhythm drumming in cadence with her heartbeat. For a moment, Emily felt transparent, as though the book saw beyond her fragile exterior into the labyrinth of fear, isolation, and aching loneliness she guarded beneath the flannel and wool. It was terrifying, but beneath that terror simmered something else, a strange, burgeoning spark. This was no ordinary volume. It was a mirror to her soul's dark corners, a language spoken by the parts of her she barely understood. And yet, with the whispered voice detailing a suppressed memory, she felt not just exposed but also strangely less alone. The fear, the shame that had been wrapped around her like heavy chains, now hummed in the air with a new texture and unspoken promise that there might be truths worth unearthing. Emily closed the book gently, the corners of the pages brushing her fingertips like the trailing fingers of an invitation. The oppressive silence deepened as the library's flickering light stabilized, the shadows drawn back as if reluctant to retreat. Outside, the fog thickened, swallowing the street lamps and muting the world to a grayscale echo. She exhaled slowly, the weight on her chest loosening just enough to breathe in possibility rather than despair. In the glass pane pressed cool against her cheek, her reflection shimmered for a heartbeat, then shifted subtly, a flicker of determination ignited beneath the quietness of her gaze. The worn leather chair sat empty behind her, an unspoken witness to the moment she stepped from the brink of retreat into an uneasy awakening. The ancient book clutched in her hands whispered promises of forbidden knowledge, secrets threatening to unravel the fragile edges of her reality. As she rose, the echo of her own voice floated faintly from the tome's depths, again not a question this time, but a beckoning. Emily looked up toward the darkened aisles, where the shadows no longer felt quite so suffocating. The unknown was no longer simply a terror lurking in familiar places. It was a Duroger, waiting, and her fingers itched to pry it open. A single flicker from the overhead lights fractured the darkness, then held steady, illuminating the dust-heavy air like a spotlight on a stage just before a long, uncertain performance. She stepped forward, her path uncertain but chosen. Behind her, the whispered voice faded into the settling quiet, the ancient book's secrets barely contained, waiting for the dawn. The library settled in the early morning fog, a muted sanctuary wrapped in pale gray whispers that seeped through the tall windows. The world outside blurred and softened like a fading memory, while inside, the quiet was thick with the scent of aged paper and damp wood. Emily sat at her desk, the ancient book lying open before her like a portal, its pages fragile and loaded with secrets she yearned both to uncover and fear. Her eyes, magnified and trembling behind the lenses of her glasses, scanned line after line of cryptic text. The words wove a tapestry of voices and memories tangled with fragments of history and whispers of the unknown. Each phrase carried a grave weight, and somewhere beneath the exhaustion and doubt, a spark flickered, a glow of fierce curiosity and defiant hope. "Is this really possible?" she murmured. Her voice was soft, reverberating quietly through the expansive room. The book had revealed it was no mere collection of stories. It was a living thing, listening, speaking back. And in those voices, plural, fractured, Emily sensed echoes of the past and shards of minds lost to time. She tapped her fingers against the table, the methodical rhythm fighting the surge of panic that fluttered like a trapped bird in her chest. Each page she turned was a step deeper into uncharted territory, a fragile bridge between knowledge and madness. Yet for the first time since the accusation, the terrifying unknown felt like an invitation rather than a threat. Emily's fingers paused over a passage detailing others, individuals much like herself who claimed to hear voices from the book. Stories of isolation, confession, and obsession intertwined with warnings she almost ignored in her desperate hunger for answers. A woman who had vanished, a man driven to madness, a scholar who found salvation in understanding. She felt caught between them, the cautionary tales and the rare glimmer of purpose that seemed to call to her from the margins. The library's flickering lights suddenly stuttered, the shadows warping and shifting into impossible angles. The sound of pages flipping came from the room's far corner, slow and purposeful, even though no one else was supposed to be there. Emily's pulse skipped, a cold dread coiling in her gut. She forced herself to breathe, to anchor in the tangible the rough texture of the table under her palms, the faint scent of old bindings. A soft knock echoed at the doorframe, a hesitant intrusion. Emily looked up to see a young colleague, Jacob, peering inside, concern clouding his usually easy smile. "You okay? You missed breakfast," he said quietly, stepping in despite the muted invitation to leave. Emily nodded, unsure if the emerging tremor in her voice was real or imagined. "Just trying to understand," she confessed, barely above a whisper. Jacob's gaze softened, but there was a hint of distance, the unspoken acknowledgement that some battles were solitary. "Don't shut us out, Em. You're not alone." She managed a faint smile, but inside, the battle raged fiercer, a war between the shadowy frontier of forbidden knowledge and the solid ground of everyday reality. The voices from the book whispered again, clearer now, weaving unsettling truths she wasn't sure she was ready to face. Days blurred into nights. Emily's steps faltered and quickened with an erratic rhythm, her obsession a restless tide pulling her deeper. Her world condensed to the brittle pages, the cryptic voices, and the steady pulse of the library's heartbeat. Alone in the archives, the flickering lights began their stuttering dance once more, painting the room with fractured light and blinded shadows. At the far end, the ancient book whispered her name, weaving a spectral thread between fear and forbidden understanding. Emily's breath caught as a sudden question resolved itself in the silence. If knowledge could free her, what price would she pay to unlock its final secret? The dim light of the library flickered unevenly, projecting fragmented shadows that shifted like restless spirits along the walls. Emily's eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, dark crescents beneath the frames of her glasses, but her gaze was intent, fixated on the open pages of the ancient book sprawled across the desk. Outside, the creeping fog pressed against the tall windows like a suffocating shroud, muffling the world to a ghostly hush. Inside, the atmosphere was charged. Every creak and whisper of the building seemed amplified. Her fingers traced the faded letters, each curve and line a tangled thread that pulled her deeper into a web of whispered truths and half-remembered nightmares. Days had blurred into restless nights since she'd first found the tome, the fragile boundary between reality and the book's dark lure growing thinner with each reading. The voices, soft, unnerving, threaded through the pages like echoes of her own fears, secrets she hadn't dared face. Emily's world had contracted, the narrow passageways of the library becoming both sanctuary and cage. The ancient shelves, once promising order, now loomed like ominous sentinels, their shadows creeping slowly toward her. The flickering lights painted jittery specters across the wood-paneled walls, the unstable illumination mirroring the unraveling threads of her mind. She caught her reflection in the dark window, her auburn hair loose and tangled, flushed cheeks betraying restless nights. The woman staring back was a fractured image, caught between desperation and a fragile resolve. She swallowed down the rising tide of doubt and ache, focusing instead on the slender thread of purpose that had begun to glimmer. But purpose demanded sacrifice. Her meticulous routine had unraveled. She arrived late, sometimes not at all. Late returns went unlogged, and the small interactions with patrons and colleagues became hurried, thin. Jacob's worry turned into quiet reproach, barely disguised beneath curt questions and sidelong glances. One afternoon, in the break room's muted light, his voice finally cracked, carrying the weight of a friendship stretched too thin. "Emily, you're shutting us out. You can't fight this alone." She looked up, eyes glistening with unshed tears, the walls she'd built trembling. "I have to," she whispered. "There's something about this book. It's not like anything else. I need to understand." His shoulders sagged. "Just don't lose yourself." Emily nodded, but the promise felt fragile as mist. The book called to her relentlessly. Whispered fragments of a forgotten world, secrets wrapped in shadows and fear. In the quiet moments, she heard the voice again, soft but insistent, threading through the library's muted stillness. It spoke truths she wasn't ready to fully grasp, revealing glimpses of memories she thought buried. That evening, alone amid the stacks, the lights flickered violently, darkness swallowing the edges of the room in overwhelming waves. Heart pounding, Emily gripped the book, her knuckles white. The air thickened, the stillness fracturing like glass. Suddenly, a page fluttered loose, drifting down like a fragile leaf to the floor. Emily hesitated, then stooped to pick it up. The edges were worn, but what caught her breath was the chilling sight. Her name, Emily Carter's, crawled across the page in deep crimson ink. Below it, a date. Today. The room spun, shadows twisting between the bookshelves, as the flickering lights faltered and died, plunging the space into a suffocating darkness. Emily's breath hitched, a cold shiver trailing down her spine. The voices she had sought to understand now felt suffocating, invasive, as if the book knew her, understood her darkest secrets better than she did herself. A sudden sound, a whisper so close it seemed to curl around her ear, made her freeze. You cannot hide from what lies within. The library, once a refuge, had transformed into a crucible of fear and revelation. Standing alone in the darkness, Emily knew her journey was no longer merely about discovering the book's secrets, it was a fight for her own fragile sanity. The library's air grew colder, thickening like fog trapped beneath low ceilings. Emily stood alone in the dim archives, clutching the ancient tome close to her chest as the shadows deepened and folded like living darkness around her. The stillness pressed heavily, too heavy, and the only sound was the brittle rustle of pages, trembling as if stirred by invisible fingers. She flipped through the fragile leaves, the dim light casting weathered letters into pale, sinister relief. Each word, each phrase, pulsed with an uncanny familiarity, like echoes from a past she'd buried beneath layers of forgetting. The book whispered her own name again, the ink seemingly bleeding across the parchment as if alive, tracing the contours of her fractured memories. Her breath hitched as a single page slipped free, fluttering to the floor like a dead leaf. Kneeling, Emily traced the crimson scrawl with trembling fingers, reading the date today, and beneath it, her name etched in urgent script. Her heart thundered, deafening in the quiet tomb of books. The room seemed to contract, walls bending inward as the flickering fluorescent lights wavered and dimmed, plunging her into a suffocating chiaroscuro of light and shadow. The whispers, once distant, rose in crescendo, swirling around her like a tempest of voices, some hers, some foreign, all haunted with truth and dread. A memory pushed through the haze, shattered fragments of a long-forgotten moment, frozen behind the veil of repression. Her childhood home, cold and silent, the sudden absence of warmth where laughter once lived, the hidden pain etched into a tiny, broken mind forced to survive alone. The book did not just reveal stories. It unraveled her, thread by fragile thread, exposing the wound she had tried to seal. A quiet despair settled as the full weight of her suppressed fear crashed over her: abandonment, betrayal, loss. The faces she'd tried to forget flickered behind her closed eyelids, a silent testament to the self she never allowed herself to fully mourn. Tears welled unbidden, tracing hot, quiet paths down her cheeks. The book whispered still, no longer a secret garden but a mirror reflecting the darkness she'd tried so hard to deny. Suddenly, the door behind her creaked open, a harsh sound slicing the silence. Jacob's hesitant voice seeped through the gloom. "Emily? Are you all right?" Her reply was barely a whisper, fragile yet painfully honest. "I remember now, everything." He stepped inside, his face etched with worry and something closer to fear. The space between them was heavy with unspoken questions. "This book. It's more than records or stories. It's my past, my pain. It speaks to the scars I can't hide anymore." Jacob reached out, tentative but steady, a fragile lifeline in the overwhelming darkness. "You don't have to face it alone." Emily looked up, eyes fierce despite the vulnerability gleaming in their depths. "I have to understand it, reclaim myself." But I'm scared, Jacob. I'm not sure how much of me will survive. The library, once a haven, had become a crucible. Outside, the fog thickened, swallowing streetlights and blurring the line between reality and nightmare. Within, the book hummed softly, unnervingly alive. With trembling hands, Emily reopened the mysterious tome, the flickering light illuminating a passage she hadn't dared read. The words coalesced into a prophecy, a dark covenant between knowledge and madness. To know the truth is to shatter the self, but from the shards, a new vision may rise. Emily's breath caught as a sudden revelation surged through her, a final, terrifying truth hidden in the cryptic text. The book did not merely reveal forgotten memories. It held the power to reshape her reality, blur the boundaries between what was and what could be. A sharp flicker of light threw the room into momentary chaos, shadows swirling like smoke. When the light steadied, the ancient book lay open at a page she had never seen before, bearing an illustration, a mirror cracked in countless places, each shard reflecting a different version of herself. Emily's voice trembled but held firm. I don't know if I'm breaking or becoming. But this is where it changes. The library seemed to exhale with her words, the flickering lights stabilizing into a steady glow that felt both ominous and awakening. The path ahead was no longer shrouded in ignorance or desperation, it was carved through pain toward an unknown reckoning. And as Emily rose, clutching the book with renewed resolve, she knew that the horror lurking in the familiar was no longer just outside her mind. It was inside her, and the fight for clarity had truly begun. The library was swallowed by an oppressive silence that even the creaks of the old wooden shelves dared not break. A thin veil of cold fog clung stubbornly to the windows, blurring the faint street lamps beyond into pale, ghostly orbs. Inside, shadows pooled in the corners like ink spilled slow and black, seeping into every crevice of the once safe haven. Emily sat slumped in her chair, an island of frailty amid the oppressive stillness, the ancient book closed and resting heavily in her lap as if it were an anchor tethering her to a sinking ship. Her auburn hair fell in disarray around her face, strands clinging with the dampness that clung to the room. The glasses perched crookedly on her nose distorted the dim reflections of flickering library lights that fractured the darkness with irregular pulses. The muted glow fractured her cage of thought, each flicker like a stutter in the rhythm of her unraveling mind. Her breath came in shallow, uneven gasps, the air feeling thick and viscous, as though the very atmosphere conspired to suffocate her thoughts. Every heartbeat echoed thunderously in her ears, a relentless drum that marked the slow erosion of her grip on reality. Once, the world had been tangible and steady, but now it blurred like a watercolor smeared by trembling fingers. The voices from the book had become a maddening echo chamber inside her skull, a chorus of whispers and urgent murmurs threading through her waking moments and invading her dreams. They spoke of things she dared not name, dredging up fragments of memories so jagged and raw that she repressed them even as they clawed for release. Outside, the wind howled low and relentless, rattling the brittle leaves against the windows like skeletal fingers scratching at glass. Inside, Emily's isolation deepened. Her few attempts at normal conversation with colleagues had become stilted and awkward. Jacob's concerned gaze now passed over her like she was a ghost, translucent and out of reach. One afternoon, standing behind the dimly lit lending desk, Emily caught her reflection in the glass, eyes shadowed and hollow, lips pale and trembling. A patron approached with a soft request, their voice gentle but distant, and she responded absent-mindedly, the words hollow echoes of herself. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" she whispered, as if her words were foreign, flung from a stranger's lips. The patron looked puzzled, their smile thin, fading soon after. Emily blinked rapidly, trying to anchor herself to the moment, but the fissures in her perception widened with every passing second. At times, the library lights flickered violently, bright snaps of illumination followed by swallowing darkness. In those stuttering moments, Emily caught glimpses of things that shouldn't be. A shadow darker than the rest, shifting at the edge of vision, a figure dissolving between the stacks, the brief sound of whispered laughter that held no joy. She began to withdraw further, her steps faltering down the aisles once familiar and now alien, each shelf a wall that closed in a little more. Conversation ceased to reach her. Jacob's attempts to reach out were met with a fragile smile that betrayed the chaos inside. In the quiet of the archives one evening, the book called to her again. She approached hesitantly, the room suddenly cold as if the shadows themselves breathed against her skin. Opening it, the words twisted and writhed before her eyes like living things, the voices beckoning, teasing. Her reflection in the darkened glass shattered into 1,000 fragments of doubt and fear. She pressed a trembling hand to her forehead, each breath slipping unevenly, as if she were drowning in air. Her identity a patchwork of fragile defenses, quiet strength, and solitary yearning began to unravel. Every familiar thread of self slipped through her fingers like smoke. And beneath it all, she felt the creeping certainty that the world she knew was slipping beyond her grasp. The library walls closed in ever tighter as shadows deepened, light dimmed until all that remained was the cold pulse of desolation, a vast and echoing emptiness. Emily sat frozen, alone among the forgotten tomes, the whispers inside her head growing louder, threatening to swallow her whole. The library's vast quiet had folded over Emily like a suffocating shroud, a grave of stillness where light barely dared to linger. The fog outside had thickened into a suffocating curtain, muffling the world beyond the frosted glass to a muted gray smear, and inside, the static hum of the flickering lights fractured the stale air like a fractured heart. The fragile glow barely sliced through the shadows pooling in the corners, shadows that shifted and breathed with a life all their own. Emily sat curled on the cold wooden floor of the archives, knees drawn to her chest, the ancient book abandoned beside her. Her auburn hair spilled in wild tendrils around a face drained of color, eyes glazed and distant beneath the weight of sleepless nights and haunted dreams. The thick sweater she wore did little to stave off the creeping cold that settled deep into her bones, making every shiver feel like it might splinter her apart. The silence around her was broken only by the faint rustling of brittle pages turning somewhere far away, though she was alone. The whispering voices from the book had become an unbearable cacophony inside her skull, fragments of accusation, sorrow, and forgotten truths weaving through her thoughts until she could no longer distinguish the shadows from the screams. The library lights flickered again, jerked by some unseen hand, plunging the room briefly into complete darkness before the feeble glow stumbled back like a dying heartbeat. In that fragmented night, Emily's gaze drifted to a cracked mirror propped against a dusty wall, a neglected remnant from some long-past renovation. The shards fragmented her reflection into 1,000 broken selfies, each one a fragment of the woman she once was, or desperately wished to be. Her eyes, though glassy, caught the fractured light, revealing the fissures in the fragile veneer, fractures running deep into the core of all she was. A tear escaped silently down her cheek, tracing a cold, glistening path, the only movement in a frozen tableau of quiet despair. The room swallowed the sound of it like a secret. Her body ached with the weight of loss, the loss of clarity, of hope, of her own tether to reality. The book, with its ancient whispering promises, had become both beacon and curse, unraveling the fabric of her mind until she no longer knew where the pages ended and her soul began. Emily's breaths came ragged and shallow, a brittle rhythm beaten out beneath the choking pressure of unspoken horrors. The flickering lights seemed to hesitate, their unstable glow echoing the faltering pulse of her own existence. Another shadow moved slower this time, more deliberate, a silhouette briefly cast across the worn floorboards, yet when she whirled around, the aisles were empty, save for the endless rows of books silently watching, indifferent. Her whispered voice was no more than a breath, a fragile thread spun thin against the crushing silence. "Please, stop." There was no answer but the hollow reverberation of her own despair. Her fingers closed into trembling fists, nails digging into the raw flesh of her palms, desperate to find something solid in the spectral void. The temperature seemed to drop further, the cold inviolable and pervasive, as if the library itself had become a tomb chamber sealed tight against the light. Time fractured inside that room. Moments stretched into eternities where the echoes of forgotten voices overlapped with the present's fragile reality. Emily felt herself dissolving into the shadows, a ghost swallowed whole by the very place she had sought refuge. The familiar world was evaporating into mist and absence, leaving her stranded on the jagged edge between waking and endless night. Her body sagged deeper into the darkness, mind spiraling into a void as silent and endless as the fog blanketing the town outside. In that crushing stillness, she touched the ancient book lying beside Harriet's cover, cold and unreadable, an unyielding monument to the knowledge that both haunted and consumed her. And as the flickering lights faltered once more, plunging her into utter darkness, Emily closed her eyes, surrendering to the silence that enveloped her, a silence deeper than any void, freezing the last flicker of hope into shadowed oblivion. The silence after the darkness felt infinite, a cavernous hollowness where each inhale echoed hollowly against unseen walls. Emily lay curled in the obscurity of the library's forgotten corner, her body a fragile coil against the cold floor, the ancient book resting at her side like a forbidding talisman. The silence was suffocating, yet beneath its weight, a faint tremor stirred the delicate flutter of a heartbeat eager to break free from encroaching despair. Her wide, unblinking eyes caught a pale gleam reflecting dimly from the shattered mirror propped against the far wall. The fractured glass fractured more than just her reflection. It mirrored the jagged fragments of her own self, splintered and scattered through nights clouded with whispered voices and waking dreams that blurred the line between truth and nightmare. A dim shaft of weak, flickering light, spilling from the failing overhead fixtures, caught the edges of the broken mirror's shards, casting prismatic fragments across the worn floor. It fractured the dark into shards of fragile illumination, as though hope itself were splintered but not extinguished. The weight pressing upon her chest was dense, yet against the cold of loss, a tiny ember glowed faintly within the labyrinth of her thoughts. The whispers, raw and insistent, wound through the library's stillness, vibrating softly, not with menace this time, but with the tremulous hint of awakening. As she lay there, a single breath escaped her lips, a fragile thread of sound stitching together the ragged edges of her shattered resolve. Her fingers twitched reflexively, knocking softly against the moss-covered, leather-bound volume that held both torment and promise. A memory flickered, slight and fleeting, a lullaby from childhood, distant but resonant, a song of safety whispered beneath steady stars and gentle hands long gone. The fragile cadence stirred a flicker deep within her, brushing softly against the barbs of fear, promising a dim path through the tangled shadows. The voices beneath the book's whisper coalesced for a moment, forming a phrase faint and uncertain, yet clear enough to steady her racing mind. Seek the light within the shadow. Emily's breathing stilled, the fragile echoes threading through her soul. Her eyes traced the map of fractured reflections on the floor, the shards playing in luminous patterns, tiny fragments of possibility bound within the darkness. Slowly, she extended a hand, trembling but resolute. Her fingers touched one shard, its surface cool and sharp. The crack mirrored the line of hesitation in her heart, but also its resiliency, a glimpse into the shattering and remaking of self. No words came from her lips, only a faint nod, a silent vow whispered into the stillness. The library's flickering light steadied, bathing the room in subdued warmth, and a breath of wind stirred through the open window, scattering a loose page from the ancient tome at her feet. In the dim glow, Emily saw the words inscribed on its yellowed surface, an invitation and a clue waiting beyond the edge of despair. And for the first time in a long while, the darkness felt less impenetrable, the silence less complete. In the cold quiet, amidst shattered reflections and fractured light, Emily sat upright, her gaze steadying with the faintest glimmer of awakening hope. The first faint glow of dawn seeped through the cracks of the age-worn windows, casting a slender, tentative light across the cluttered library. Shadows still clung stubbornly to the corners, but the oppressive heaviness that had blanketed the space was lifting, replaced by a fragile serenity that shimmered just beneath the surface of darkness. Emily sat upright, her shoulders tense but receptive, the ancient book open in her lap like a sacred relic demanding renewal. Her face, lit by the soft dawn, appeared calmer, a subtle shift that shimmered even through her tired eyes. The weight of nights spent teetering on the brink had not fully lifted her body, still bore the aches of despair and doubt, but a new awareness glimmered within her, faint but undeniable. The flickering lights of the library flickered less violently now, their erratic dance transforming into a gentle hum, a lullaby of tentative reassurance. Outside, the fog waned, dissolving into the awakening sky in tendrils of pale gold and dusty rose, heralding a possible escape from shadow and silence. Emily's gaze fell upon the pages smeared with half-erased memories, the words now flickering like ghostly echoes that refused to fade into darkness. Her fingers brushed the fragile parchment, feeling the faint pulse of the ink, a heartbeat of hope that refused to die. Memories of childhood surfaced, simple, untainted, and honest. A warm mantra whispered in her mind, softly at first, then gaining strength: light over darkness, truth over fear. It was a fragile seed, long kept buried beneath layers of fear and despair, but now germinating in the fertile soil of her consciousness. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips, a secret seed of resilience buried beneath layers of grief. The shadows that once danced cruelly to her mind's symphony seemed to recede, retreating in the face of a tentative vow rising from within. Her trembling hand reached out, not to grasp the book, but to touch her own heart, a silent pledge to seek the light, however faint. The library's dust-laden air shifted, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and renewal, an olfactory compass pointing toward hope. The faint morning glow touched the oldest shelves, illuminating the pages of forgotten stories, awakening the silent voices of those long gone but never lost. A single, quiet breath expelled from her lips, a gesture both of surrender and reclamation. Her eyes, still shadowed but now clearer, fixed upon the horizon beyond the fogan and spoken acknowledgment that the night, however dark, was finally beginning to lift. In this quiet, changing moment, Emily saw the first delicate brushstrokes of a new possibility. Perhaps the darkness would be less all-consuming. Perhaps her journey was just beginning, and the terrible secrets that haunted her might one day find peace. And somewhere deep inside, the faintest flicker of something unbreakable stirred, an ember of resolve, waiting to ignite, fragile yet resilient, as the dawn stretched across the sky with silent promise. The air in the library had shifted from an oppressive silence to a tense anticipation, as if reality itself held its breath. Emily stood at the center of it all, her figure illuminated by a fragile, golden glow spilling through the tall windows. The ancient book rested in her trembling hands, yet now, she bore it with a steadiness that radiated an unwavering resolve. Her eyes, once hollow and haunted, now shimmered with a quiet certainty and understanding born from the depths of her suffering, from her shattered illusions. She traced the worn cover, feeling the rough texture beneath her fingertips, and whispered softly, as if calling forth a spell of awakening. "I am more than whispers and shadows," she declared, voice clear and steady, cutting through the heavy silence. "I am the light, and I refuse to be consumed." The flickering light steadied, the shadows retreating as her words seemed to ignite a spark of courage within. With deliberate resolve, Emily lifted the book, opening it to a page she had previously ignored, a page that pulsed with a strange energy, almost alive. Her breath caught as ancient symbols shimmered and danced across the parchment, casting a kaleidoscope of light that flickered like the first dawn after a long night. She knelt before the tome, her fingers tracing the symbols, her voice growing stronger. "I demand the truth. Reveal what you are. Show me the secrets you hide." The room seemed to warp as the book responded. Its pages fluttered violently, the words no longer ink but raw, living energy. The symbols expanded, swirling in an intricate dance of light and darkness, forming a vortex that beckoned her inward. Time fractured, the boundaries between the seen and unseen dissolving. Shadows coalesced into shapes, memories, and fears, yet amid this chaos, Emily reached out, a symbolic act of courage. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and pressed her hand firmly against her heart. "No more hiding," she whispered, words echoing with newfound authority. "No more running from the truth." A sudden burst of radiant light exploded from the pages, illuminating every dark corner of the room in a blinding, purifying flood. The shadows recoiled, vanishing into the ether. Emily's face shimmered with tears, relief and strength intertwined, thus she felt an invisible barrier shatter into fragments. The symbols erupted in a final shimmering burst, revealing a radiant Korea mirror, whole and unbroken, reflecting her true self standing tall amid the wreckage. Her chest rose and fell, but her gaze was fearless now, eyes steady and clear. The library, once a theater of despair, was transforming into a sanctuary silent yet alive with possibility. The ancient book, exhausted but at peace, closed softly, its whispers now a gentle hum in the background. Emily lifted her hand towards the window, where the first soft light of dawn was spilling across the sky, casting warm hues that touched her face like a benediction. Her breath formed a fleeting cloud, fading into the new light. In that moment, she understood with trembling a wet hat her journey had unlocked her inner strength, a force born from the depths of darkness but shimmering with the promise of renewal. The shadows had retreated, but their echoes lingered, a reminder that the fight for truth and self was ongoing. She turned, the weight of years lifted, and stepped toward the doorway, her figure silhouetted against the dawn, a symbol of quiet resilience amid the awakening world outside. The room was bathed in a luminous, almost divine light, spilling through the towering windows like dawn's awakening. Shadows had dissolved into pure warmth, and the heavy air was now alive with a gentle, pulsing energy, an echo of her own renewed spirit. Emily stood at the center, the ancient book closed but cradled in her hands like a precious relic, its previous whispers silenced, conquered. Her face, once marred by despair, now bore the calm of unwavering resolve. The faint glow accentuated her features, eyes focused, shoulders lifted, a quiet strength emanating from her core. Her breath was steady, deep, and filled with a new understanding, a lightness that refused to be extinguished. The flickering lanterns and dying shadows had become symbols of darkness she had fought and ultimately transcended. She looked at the world outside, the sky painted in hues of pink and gold, the air rich with promise, and she was no longer a victim of unseen horrors but a guardian of her own truth. Her fingers brushed softly against the pages of the book, no longer trembling in fear but resting with reverence. A small, firm smile played on her lips as she whispered aloud, voice unwavering. "I see you now, the shadows, the whispers, they no longer control me." A gentle breeze entered through the open window, carrying with it the scent of earth and the promise of a new beginning. The library, once a prison of despair, shimmered in a halo of light, an emblem of her transformation. She stepped forward, her posture proud but filled with humility, each movement deliberate, echoing a fierce, unbreakable purpose. Her gaze settled on the horizon, where the fog was lifting, revealing the distant silhouette of a rising sun. She watched in stillness, letting the warm rays wash over her, dissolving the remnants of darkness lingering in her mind. That moment, suspended in the dawn's quiet splendor, was a testament to resiliency and unspoken vow that darkness could never again consume her. With a deep breath that felt like reclaiming her entire soul, Emily reached out and gently closed the ancient book, a final act of releasing the nightmare that once shrouded her. The closed volume shone faintly in the morning light, an enduring symbol of victory and inner awakening. Slowly, she turned toward the library's grand doors, her silhouette framed by the sunrise, a figure reborn from chaos into clarity. Her steps were calm but resolute, each one marking the beginning of a new chapter, one where she held her truth close, unshaken and unbroken. The doors swung open smoothly, revealing the vast, uncharted world beyond, bright, open, limitless. She paused, taking in the vastness with a peaceful, unafraid gaze. The air was crisp and full of possibility, each breath a reminder that her journey through darkness had transformed her, reshaping her from shadow's prey to light's master. The camera pulled back slowly, capturing her standing at the threshold, poised, calm, and radiant before the frame dissolved into the tender, luminous dawn, embracing the promise of renewal and the unbreakable strength she had reclaimed. The quiet dawn seeped softly through the stained glass windows, casting gentle, fractured light across the still and empty library. Shadows had retreated beyond the horizon, replaced by a luminous calm that seemed to breathe alongside her. Emily sat quietly near the center of the room, the ancient book closed on the table before her, its once dark pages now shimmering with a tranquil glow, silent witnesses to her silent transformation. Her hands rested in her lap, delicate and composed, trembling only slightly like the last flicker of a dying ember. Her eyes, framed behind gentle glasses, appeared clearer than they had in months, calmer, steadier, filled with a quiet warmth that seemed to embrace both her and the world outside. She looked around the library, their familiar sanctuary, its shelves now bathed in a golden hue. Once, the shadows had threatened to engulf her, but now, they lay behind her, subdued and resigned. The flickering lamps were steadier, casting a reassuring glow that hinted at a fragile security, a fragile promise of peace. The air was filled with an unspoken lullaby and affirmation that the storm had passed, that her journey through darkness had not been in vain. Her gaze settled on the large, cracked mirror leaning against the wall, the same mirror, fractured into countless shards, that once reflected her shattered self. Now, it reflected a woman who had faced her deepest fears and emerged, not unscarred but whole. Her fingers absent-mindedly brushed the edge of the book, feeling its faint warmth, a vessel of forbidden truths, now silent. The whispers that once echoed relentlessly in her mind had faded into a distant memory, replaced by the steady rhythm of her own breath. A soft breeze drifted in through the open window, carrying whispers of the awakening world beyond. She closed her eyes briefly, exhaling a breath she had unknowingly held for too long. Her mind, once a tumult of chaos and despair, now fluttered with gentle acceptance. The shadows of her past had been confronted and laid to rest, and in their place, a quiet understanding blossomed. The dawn's light deepened, spilling across the room like a benediction. Her face, serene and luminous, reflected a fragile hope, the recognition that her inner darkness, though profound, had not defeated her. It had shaped her, yes, but she was no longer its prisoner. She reached for a small, fragile flower in untouched bloom placed on a nearby shelf, a symbol of renewal and resilience, and cradled it in her hand, feeling its delicate pulse of life. In that simple gesture, she accepted her journey, the pain, the loss, the slow emergence of strength, and embraced the quiet beauty of renewal. The camera slowly pulled back, capturing her silhouette against the vibrant horizon, a figure quietly reborn among the echoes of shadows and light, a testament to resilience. The sun rose higher, casting long, warm rays into the library, illuminating the space with a promise, an unspoken vow that, no matter what darkness once dwelled here, hope would always find its way back. The soft glow of dawn spilled through the library's ancient stained glass windows, casting a mosaic of muted colors onto the dust-laden shelves and worn leather chairs. Emily moved slowly through the space, her steps gentle yet purposeful, her presence lighter than it had been in months. Her face carried a subtle serenity, a quiet acceptance born from the long, arduous journey she now understood was truly hers. She paused briefly before the empty desk where the ancient book once lay. Its pages were closed, its whispers silenced, but its presence lingered, an invisible imprint on her soul. A calming breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the scent of fresh autumn air, warmth after the icy despair. Silence filled the room, but it was no longer oppressive. It was a space of reflection, of peace. The shadows that once haunted her had dissolved into the background, replaced by a gentle light that shimmered with the promise of renewal. Small movements, her hand resting on the desk, her gaze lifting toward the horizon, were silent affirmations of her reclaimed strength. Her eyes lingered on the reflection in the broken mirror, no longer fractured into chaos but united into clarity. The fragments of her past, once jagged and unhealed, now shimmered with a newfound compassion. She gently brushed her fingers over her auburn hair, a soft acknowledgement of her resilience. A quiet smile touched her lips, humble yet profound. She had faced the furthest reaches of her darkness, the whispers, the shadows, the fractured self, and found a way back, not unscathed but unbowed. In that still moment, she reached into her bag and retrieved a small, fragile flower, an embodiment of her rebirth. Gently, she placed it on the desk, a symbol of hope, acceptance, and the gentle courage that carried her forward. Standing upright, Emily stepped toward the library's grand doors, pushing them open slowly, revealing the endless horizon beyond. The world was awash in the golden light of the rising sun, a silent herald of her inner dawn. As she took her first step into the luminous morning, her gaze lifted, not with fear but with a quiet, unshakable conviction. The shadows of her past were now just memories, luminous threads woven into the fabric of her strength. She paused at the threshold, a moment suspended in grace, and then stepped forward into the unfolding dire heart filled with silent gratitude for the fears she had faced, the secrets she had uncovered, and the unbreakable spirit that had guided her back from the brink. The camera pulled away slowly, capturing her silhouette against the awakening sky, embodiment of resilience, peace, and quiet hope as the dawn's golden light sealed her transformation into a new, unutterably honest self. The first light of dawn spilled softly over the horizon, bathing the quiet town in a tender glow that seemed to heal the gaping wounds of night. Emily stepped out into the early morning, her figure unhurried, as if drawn by an unspoken pull toward serenity. Her coat swayed gently in the cool breeze, a symbol of the peace she had painstakingly reclaimed from the chaos that once threatened to drown her. She moved through the empty streets, the cobblestones still damp from a recent rain, each step resonating with a quiet, reverent purpose. The town, wrapped in a veil of fog, appeared as a living poem, still and gentle, holding its breath at the threshold of awakening. In her hand, she carried a small, fragile flower, the same one she had placed on her desk long ago, now slightly wilted but still proud, a silent testament to resilience and renewal. As she looked up, her eyes reflecting the rising sun, she saw the world through a lens transformed. The shadows of her past, once monstrous and all-consuming, lay behind her, an indelible part of her story, yet no longer overpowering. Her steps slowed as she approached a familiar old tree, the keeper of her childhood memories, its branches sprawling wide, tenderly touching the awakening sky. She reached out, fingertips brushing the gnarled bark with gentle reverence, feeling the quiet strength that had sustained her through nights of shadows and whispers. A deep breath filled her lungs, untainted, and she closed her eyes for a moment, allowing her senses to embrace this sacred silence. Around her, the breeze played softly, whispering old lullabies of hope and awakening, as if nature itself acknowledged her rebirth. The entire world seemed to hold its breath in harmony with her own quiet transformation. A bird song pierced the stillness, a delicate, exquisite note that beckoned her toward something greater. Emily's lips curled into the faintest of smiles, a bridge between her internal peace and the boundless dawn. A star-shaped pendant hanging from her neck caught the first glint of sunlight, shimmering softly amid the leaves. It was her talisman, her reminder that even amidst darkness, there exists a glimmer of infinite possibility. She looked once more at the town, a place scarred by shadows but rich with quiet beauty, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude that she had faced her fears, walked through the depths of her own night, and emerged, quietly, resiliently, into the dawn. As the camera slowly pulled back, capturing her silhouette against the luminous sky, the scene dissolved into a tranquil tableau, an enduring metaphor for peace after turmoil, a testament to the indomitable strength of the human spirit and the healing power of silent courage. The world was waiting, silent and vast, and she moved forward into it, her heart open and unburdened, her soul finally at peace, free. Have you ever heard your own voice in an unexpected place? Share your creepiest encounters.